Hello, welcome to Growing in Uncertainty. My name is Tess Miller, and through my seminar and coaching business, Wings Unfolded, I help people who love what they're doing, but they're not sure where it's going. I make these videos from a standpoint of actually helping myself, but my hope is that they help you too. Topics always relate to whatever's going on in my life right now, and wherever I'm feeling stuck in my life. So my hope is that in sharing what I'm doing about these stuck places in my life, that I can help you with yours and we can grow in uncertainty together. So there's been a lot going on these days, right? I know a lot of people are maybe getting ready to go back to school, or they're getting their kids ready to go back to school, or they are back in school. And there's a lot going on in the world and in the weather, and it just seems like every turn there's just something running in the background of our lives. And one of the things that has come up for me is that it's very easy for me to make mistakes in my life when there's so much going on in the background. And then, when we make mistakes, then things don't really go the way that we necessarily plan for them to go. And so something this week didn't go the way that I had planned or hoped for. And as a result, the feelings that came up for me were hurt and disappointment, frustration, and I started to feel afraid that things would never work out for me in the way that I wanted it to. My thoughts on this turned pretty dark in that time. One of my thoughts was, this is all my fault, or maybe I should just give up, or my life's been a whole waste. Like it was pretty intense. In a lot of ways, these thoughts just kind of happened. It was almost like a knee-jerk reaction to whatever came up for me. But then on top of that, that was my inner critic. On top of my inner critic spewing all of those nasty thoughts my direction, I noticed that there was a part of me that was trying to push those thoughts and feelings away and really resisting them. I would have secondary thoughts that sounded like, you're a coach, you shouldn't be thinking that, or you really shouldn't feel this way because, or what's wrong with you, get over this. All of those kinds of thoughts were kind of secondary to the initial inner critic thoughts. So not only did I have an inner critic, but my inner critic also had a critic. So I wanted to talk about what's really going on in this scenario when we have an inner critic. And maybe we've gotten to a point in our lives where we've done some personal development and we can feel a little bit self-defeated, like, oh my gosh, I should be over my inner critic already, right? So what happens is that our inner critic can cause us to resist what's going on. That's kind of our natural reaction when something doesn't go the way that we really want it to go. The inner critic will then start to say mean, kind of bullying things to ourselves, and it kind of twists the truth a little bit to kind of validate what those feelings and thoughts are. It makes up stories and interpretations about what happened to really support the resistance that we're starting to put up. But these stories that the inner critic makes up are often highly emotionally and energetically charged. And it's really easy to end up believing them because they come with that intense kind of a feeling. It wasn't true that whatever happened this last weekend was my fault. It wasn't true that it was a sign that I needed to give everything up, and it certainly wasn't true that my life has been a complete waste. But on top of all of that, resisting of what is actually happening, the critic of the inner critic started to resist the resistance. For example, I started blaming myself for the experience of the experience. I had a lot of should statements pop up in my head. You shouldn't feel this way because, or you're handling this all wrong, or you should be ashamed of yourself for feeling this way. You know, all of those should statements, when those start to come up, that's a red flag for an inner critic, or maybe even the critic of the inner critic. So instead of putting my energy into resisting what was actually happening, I realized that I needed to just allow what was happening, you know. And allow for me is an acronym. It means to first accept what has happened, then to live in the present, to love yourself, to organize your thoughts and emotions, and then wait for the next best step to come to your awareness. So that all stands for allow. So the A in allow, accept. Accepting involves acknowledging what has happened and validating your personal experience. You know, it's important, though, to stay in your own lane when you're acknowledging what is going on. And what I mean by that is that, you know, sometimes when we acknowledge what has happened, we can start to look around ourselves for, you know, well, what would so-and-so do about this? Or what would they say about this? But it's important to stay in your own lane. Don't worry about how you think somebody else might have handled things or would handle things going forward. Who cares ultimately how you think it should be handled? You know, just try to let go of all of that. Just allow the full experience to happen and call yourself out on resisting the experience, and just simply accept what is, all of it, the thoughts, the emotions, the whole shebang. The first L of allow stands for live in the present, or live in the present moment. So in order to live in the present moment, it might be important for you to ground yourself in that present moment, or ground yourself in your body. That can be a really great way to just stay present. So one of the ways that some people can ground themselves in the present moment is to just focus on breathing. There's some great breathing techniques out there. Breathing in for 5 counts, holding for 5 counts, exhaling for 5 counts, holding for 5 counts, and then repeat slowly. Another way to ground yourself in the present moment is to meditate. If you have any experience with meditation, then that might be a great way. Or, of course, there are all kinds of meditation apps out there that can help guide you through just grounding yourself in the moment. Or you can focus on different body areas. Just close your eyes and breathe and notice where you feel tension without trying to change it. Just notice. And just be with it, be present with it. Know that it's not going to last forever, but that you can be aware of what is. The other thing that you can do is involve your senses. And I think I talked about this last week. You know, just really try to focus on exactly what you're seeing right now, or exactly what you're hearing, what you're smelling or tasting or feeling on your skin. That can help root you in the present moment as well. So the second L of allow is to love yourself. This is not as easy as it sounds for a lot of people. But it is something that I believe is really important as a practice in life. We do have to practice loving ourselves, especially when we have an intense inner critic wanting to invade our thoughts and reactions in life. So loving yourself really involves a lot of self-kindness. And one of the spiritual teachers that I follow from time to time is named Teal Swan, and she often recommends that people ask themselves the question, what would someone who loved themselves do? You know, so think about if you're energetically, emotionally charged in a situation and your inner critic is really pounding at your door of awareness, what would someone who really and truly loved themselves do? And if it's really hard to answer that question, then one way you can think about it is, you know, what would you do for a friend if they were going through the same experience that you're going through right now? What might you say to them? What might you do for them? How would you show them that no matter what, you loved them? And then you can, you know, find ways that you can demonstrate that to yourself. And then finally, to demonstrate love, just have compassion for yourself. You know, we're all human beings. Everyone is always doing the best that they can. I know sometimes it might not seem like it, especially these days, but everyone truly is doing the best that they can. So just remember that, and remember that that means you too. You're doing the best that you can in every single situation of your life. The O of allow is for organize your thoughts and emotions. This is one where you kind of have to do it once you're a lot less emotionally charged. We can't get clear about what's happening in our lives until we have allowed the emotion to be there, but also to pass through us, to not be quite so energetically charged by it. So once you are less emotionally charged, you can sit down with your thoughts and feelings and name them. You know, really say them to yourself. Okay, I'm thinking that I'm a failure. And you can sort these thoughts and feelings out and decide which of the thoughts are truly true, which of the thoughts are just exaggerated and just plain wrong, or which feelings that are coming up for you belong in the present moment. Like, okay, it's understandable that I feel this way right now because... Or are there feelings that are coming up for you that are rooted in the past? Is whatever's happening right now to cause your inner critic to go berserk, is that something that reminds you of something that happened in the past? Is it triggering something within you? There's a really great saying that I'm not going to think of it now, so never mind. But there was a really great saying that goes along with this, but we'll move on. So which feelings belong in the past? So in other words, when did you last feel this way? You know, sometimes, for example, when I make a mistake in my life, it'll trigger an old feeling from my childhood. Like I remember, oh my gosh, this is an old feeling. I've had this from time to time. And one of those feelings is that mistakes that I make in life mean that I'm a bad person automatically and I should be punished. I have no idea where that thought and feeling came from, and why, you know, why this has become a trigger in my life, but it has. So I recognize this and recognize that it's a sign that I need to get organized and really call that thought and feeling out and say, that's something old, that's from my past, that has no business being in the present moment. So the W, our last letter of the word allow, the W stands for wait for your next step. So once there's clarity about what's really going on, it's time to find a solution, or it's time to allow a solution to come to you. One of the ways I might sit down and look for a solution to whatever's going on for me is to just brainstorm, and I'll put anything on that brainstorm list. It doesn't matter how outlandish or silly it is. I'll just write it down. Sometimes the weirdest things that I put on my brainstorm list end up being the most creative solutions for whatever's going on. The other thing that you can do is talk to someone else. When we listen to ourselves actually say things out loud, we get so much clarity. I don't know if you've ever had that experience when you share something with someone and then you say, I can't believe I just said that. And it really can be a moment of reconciling what your true beliefs or thoughts or feelings are, so that you can decide, I don't want that belief. It's time to change that, or that's really holding me back in my life. The other thing you can do is to just wait. Maybe don't do anything right away. Sometimes the best epiphanies that I've ever had just kind of come out of the blue. If I had forced a solution out of myself, I would never have found the perfect one. So sometimes just waiting and seeing. You won't have to wait forever, I promise. Something will absolutely come to you. But, if another idea for figuring out your next step might be to sit down with your inner critic and consult your inner critic. Obviously, your inner critic has stuff to say, right? But it's maybe not expressing it in the most healthy way. So maybe it needs a little help in expressing. The inner critic is kind of like the complainer in your life, that person in your life that maybe complains about everything, but they never actually take action on the stuff that they're complaining about. It's those people that you just wish that you could say, like, sure, if you don't like it, go do something about it. Well, that's your inner critic too. You can talk back to your inner critic. And I know that might be a little scary because we can really be mean to ourselves. It can be a stretch to think that your inner critic could ever be helpful to you in any way. But I want to look at a perspective shift on your inner critic today. And then I'm going to do a demo with myself on how to consult with your inner critic. But before we can work on shifting our perspectives on our inner critics, let's take a moment to look again at what it's really saying. So what you can do is just sit down and maybe write out all of the mean, nasty things that your inner critic says to you. You might start to really see how much of a bully your inner critic really is. And remember, bullies are always coming from a place of insecurity. If there's anything that I've learned from the bullying research out there, is that bullies don't really feel good about themselves. If they did, they wouldn't be bullying. So your inner critic is that part of you that doesn't feel good about yourself. But the thing to remember is that your inner critic is still a part of you. And when you look at it like that, you have to ask yourself, what part of me wouldn't want me to succeed? And the answer is, there's probably no part of you that doesn't want you to succeed. Like maybe you're afraid of succeeding, but that doesn't mean that you don't want to succeed. So it's important to remember that actually your inner critic wants to help you. It wants to point out all the places where things need fixing, or you need to think about it differently or do it differently. But it's also emotionally charged, and it's really afraid that it's not going to work out. So your inner critic does want to help you, but, we have to train it. We have to set boundaries with our inner critics. What happens when I say shift your perspective from my inner critic wants to hurt me to my inner critic wants to help me? Just sit with that for a second. If your inner critic wants to help you, How do you feel about your inner critic? For me, when I think about my inner critic actually wanting to help me, I feel a little bit more compassion. I feel more compassionate towards it. I can't talk today, I'm sorry. But I feel a lot more compassion for my inner critic when I think about it actually wanting to be on my side. And I know that my inner critic is going through this experience with me. I mean, it is me, right? And I can start to see my inner critic as being really insecure and maybe experiencing a lot of pain too. So then that makes me want to help my inner critic, because if I can help my inner critic, then I can help myself. And I sort of end up feeling a lot of gratitude that my inner critic has intentions that are noble. They might be misguided, but they are noble. So once you truly accept that your inner critic really actually wants to help you, now you can start to imagine consulting your inner critic. But like I said earlier, you have to create some boundaries with your inner critic first. You know, we create boundaries with other people in our lives all the time. You know, there are certain people that we have to do that with. If we don't create boundaries with people in our lives, then you know, we end up being a people pleaser. People start to walk all over us and our needs don't get met. So it's really important to set those boundaries with other people. But it's also really important to set those boundaries with yourself. So I decided this weekend to have a boundary confirming or establishing conversation with my inner critic this past weekend. And it went something like this. Me. Thanks for looking out for me, but when you said that I was a failure and that it was all my fault, that really hurt my feelings. Inner critic. Well, I just didn't want you to do anything more damaging to your reputation. Me. That makes sense, but I see things differently than you do. How interested are you in hearing my perspective? Inner critic. I guess so. Me. The way I see it is that I did the best I could, and even though things didn't turn out the way that we had hoped for, I still learned a lot, and I know what I would do differently next time. This is part of my learning process. How much sense does that make to you? Inner critic. I guess so, but what if you never succeed? Me. Your fears are understandable given the way you feel about success, but how helpful do you think it is to focus on fears of never succeeding? Inner critic. Not helpful. Me. How interested are you in learning how to help me instead? Inner critic. Sure. Me. Tell me something that did go well. Inner critic. Well, you showed up and did the work. That took some guts. Me. Thanks. It's nice to know that you think I have courage. How about some constructive feedback? Inner critic. Next time, you could spend more time personally inviting people to support you, giving you a bigger audience? Me. That's a good idea. Thanks. So, in addition to creating a boundary for your inner critic, you're also training your inner critic to basically have a different job. Instead of criticizing you, it becomes an ally to you. Instead of pointing out only what went wrong, you have your inner critic point out what went right. And you have to remind your inner critic to keep it neutral if it can't be positive. Over time, this will take shape a lot more quickly. This is not an overnight thing, obviously, especially if your inner critic has been operating in your life pretty fluently for some time. So it's something that we have to practice. Obviously, I still have to practice it too. But over time, you might notice that you don't always end up with the negative inner critic. You might start to hear some of the inner ally start to speak before your inner critic does. And you'll also develop better resilience when you do have setbacks in life. So I hope this message resonates with you. Thank you so much for joining me today. I always appreciate any feedback that you want to share. And it really, really helps if you subscribe to my Facebook page, to my YouTube channel, to my LinkedIn. That helps me know who's out there, and it helps me know which messages are resonating with people. And I'd love it if you could share these videos with friends, family, anybody you think might be interested. That'll help. The more people who subscribe and like all of my stuff, the more it'll get out to more people. So you can stay tuned to any updates on Facebook or LinkedIn under my business name. You can find me under my name, Tess Miller, on LinkedIn and Instagram as well, or on YouTube. And the playlist for these videos is called Growing in Uncertainty. So please subscribe to those. And if there's something that you want help with in your life that's related to a transition or just feeling stuck in a place in your life, feel free to send me a private message. I'd love to connect with you and see how I can help. Remember that it's okay to be stuck, but you don't have to stay there. Have an awesome week and take care.